Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Success Thursday. This week we have with us Tinatin Tabidze. Hey, Tinatin, welcome back.
Hello, Vasco. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Success Thursday, of course, we're going to talk about success. That's the key question of the week. But before we jump into that, Tinatin, tell us, what's your favorite retrospective format and why?
Good question. I already referred to Spotify Health Check. I think that's a great retrospective tool if you want to do like a general health check of how the team is doing. Not necessarily as in retrospective once every sprint, but maybe once per quarter. That's a good way to go about it. One thing I would also do, not on regular basis, but maybe during a big change in the organization or in the type of work that the team is doing, would be called something called moving motivators. That's always a nice tool, especially as I said during change. But on daily basis, I like to keep retrospectives different from one another and very much tailored to the sprint, and start out with a basic structure of my typical retrospective would be some sort of icebreaker, very like initial, how are you doing, how's your week, and maybe some I don't know, again, icebreaker games basically. And then we move to having actual inspection of the sprint, what went well, but never in this formulation because I think that's overdone. But maybe have a look at metrics, how we're doing, whether there are certain specific aspects of the sprint that need to be addressed first. Also, we have a look at improvement backlog before starting the actual sprint, whether there's progress on certain improvement backlog items that we have to revise or go back to at the moment. And then we start with evaluating the sprint that had just finished. And with that, again, I think it's very important to always keep it updated and fresh. The baseline could be that of what went well, what didn't go so well, and what improvements you have in mind. But I think that's a very foundational understanding and can be formulated in many different ways. And as Scrum Masters, I think it's important that we find the best formulation for the exact 2 or 3 weeks or whatever cadence your sprints are.
Yeah, absolutely. Just an idea that came up, as you said, basically what we're doing with the retrospective is to figure out what went well, what didn't go so well, and what we want to change. But as the example that you shared, if you start by discussing data, hey, here's the data that we've collected over the sprint. What does this tell you? And then you can add about what went well and what didn't go so well. And once you've done that, you can then have a conversation about, okay, of these things, what we would like to what would we like to change?
Mm-hmm.
I like the using data aspect, and it does not need to be quantitative. It can be qualitative metric, like for example, team members' moods during the sprint, or the level of fear if you're doing a major release after the sprint, right? But that the data, when collected, can then be shown to the team, and we can ask the team, what do you think this data is trying to tell us?
Yeah,
right? Because it is the team's interpretation that matters in the end.
Yes, goes back to that. Who can give you the best context? Probably the team, right? And what's their interpretation of the data? And from there, you can pick items which are best suited for discussion for that sprint. So I think that's always a good way to start.
Absolutely. Now, of course, we do these retrospectives because we want to, in the end, be successful in our roles as Scrum Masters. And that brings us to the question of the week, Tinatin. So share with us, what's your definition for success as a Scrum Master?
I'd say, very simply put, the less the team needs you as a Scrum Master, the more successful you are. And that goes back to helping teams be more self-organizing rather than dependent on someone else to take over the processes, basically. And obviously, this can vary first depending on how long the team members have been working together, what's their synergy like. Product owner plays a big role in this, and also the type of product that they are delivering. So I think success as a Scrum Master again qualifies as how self-organized your team is and how much you let them, take the reins in some aspects and just be there to jump in wherever needed, but stay back for most of the time. And this is not for new teams. Surely that they need to be built from ground zero and up, and that's also a great process in and of itself. Especially for a Scrum Master, when you're building a team, you can start by workshopping basically everything that goes into having a successful framework. But in the end, I think it's very important to let the teams guide themselves um, and work with as less of a dependency on a Scrum Master as possible.
And it's not that, I mean, it's easy to say, let the teams guide themselves or let them be self-organized, but it's not so easy to get there. And this is a little bit of a paradox built into the Scrum Master role, because our role is to help teams, but then we can only succeed if we're not needed to help them anymore. So it's kind of a paradox here, right? So one interesting question from my perspective is, how are you keeping yourself honest about this paradox, right? Because you're a Scrum Master because you're there to help, but you're only really successful when you're not needed anymore. It's like, how do you keep yourself honest, and how do you keep track of the team's level of self-organization?
So I think encouraging continuous improvement for yourself, first and foremost, as a Scrum Master, and then for the team would be the key there. So being very honest about the pitfalls of the team and what kind of work needs to be done is the essential step of then figuring out how much involvement of a Scrum Master does this team require. And in essence, you can start by evaluating how self organizing they are through, let's say, ceremonies. Take ceremonies, for example. And this is a very tangible example. How good are they at a daily stand up? And I don't mean how good are they at reporting, but how well do they understand why the daily stand up is so important and why are they there basically, and what's the essence of the work that's done on that ceremony, and whether or not they need Scrum Masters involvement there. I think that's a good starting point because it's more evident and more face value there. But then this can, as you go further and further, can go into more complex details as to how the processes are streamlined in the team and how organized they are for their delivery pipeline, etc. But this is for once you move up the line. So I'd say start out with ceremonies. There are multiple of those where you can just step back and let the team play out. And then if you see something, retrospective is a great place to bring that up and be like, hey guys, this is going very well. And I think this can add to it. And this can take you to the next level of that self-organizing team. And also with a Scrum Master, keeping yourself accountable for that and keeping an eye and not just sitting in on meetings is so important because that's where you get the data, right? Being a Scrum Master for a self-organized team does not mean that you're just sitting in on meetings. Actually, in some essence, I would argue that it's even harder because how do you make good teams great then? And these are through small, meticulous improvements, which when you're building up a team may not seem that important. But once you get into those very detailed, aspects of the work that the team is doing, that's where you can actually identify. And there you have to be very attentive, in my opinion.
I was just thinking as you were talking about the aspect of observing the ceremonies and participating in the meetings, like there's two things in my mind. So the first one is a very good test for our ability to help the team self-organize is to actually be away. Mm-hmm. Right. So, for example, don't start the stand-up. Let somebody else do that. Do they, or do they wait for you? Right. Like that's a very simple test. And then the other thing is observe the interaction between the team members, especially in the meetings that you are not facilitating, right? Because the ones you're facilitating, you're probably gonna, be motivated to jump in and so on. But the ones you're not facilitating, on purpose, step back and don't talk unless you are asked something, right? And just focus on observing, because that's actually one of the things that I think, at least I missed when I started as a Scrum Master, which was this concept or idea that my role is to help teams and team members work better together. My role is not to tell them what to do, is to figure out why they can't know what to do themselves without asking me or without my intervention, right? And this observing interactions within the teams is within the meeting, is a great example of how we can do that.
Yeah. So how do you take teams to the next level? That's always starting out fairly easy. I mean, there is I'm sure a checkbox that you can find of what are some things that need to be set up very well in place for the team to be regarded as a good Scrum team, but like a well-performing Scrum team. But as you go further and further, you have to just step back and observe, and also have a overview picture, maybe a little detached even, of how does this fit into a larger picture of the organizational pipeline or something like this. And that's, I think, where you can also get more inspiration from.
Absolutely. And that inspiration is so critical for our own growth as Scrum Masters as well. Thank you for sharing this, Tinatin.
Thank you, Vasco.
Part of a successful Scrum Master job is to help the product owner. Tomorrow we explore that critical role in Scrum, the product owner role. Tune in to learn about product owner anti-patterns, what you can do to help the product owner, and a real-life example of what a great product owner is and what made it so. Tomorrow on our Friday Product Owner episode. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.